You're listening to the Sisters-in-Laws podcast, a faith-based podcast that spotlights Black women who replace silence with storytelling around pregnancy and infant loss and infertility. Black women experience miscarriage and stillbirth 4 to 5 times more likely than white women, according to the NIH and CDC. Whether you've experienced a miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, are trying to conceive, or have an infertility diagnosis, you will learn about resources and strategies to heal, gain clarity, peace, hope, and find an empowering path forward after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee, and you will hear me interview sisters-in-laws who have healed from such a painful and traumatic experience by sharing their testimonies and stories to inspire and help others turn their pain into their purpose. Now let's get started. Thank you, Keivon, for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I am 31 years old. I currently reside in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was born and raised in Chicago, but now I live in the South. I am a flight attendant and a small business entrepreneur.
Awesome. My old hometown. I used to live in Charlotte for about 4 years, so Charlotte still has a place in my heart always. Actually, my firstborn son was buried in Charlotte, so when we go back, we always go visit his grave site. So
nice. I haven't been here. I've been here less than a year, but it's really grown on me since I've been here.
That's good. So I would love for you to share with us just your journey to motherhood and your loss story.
Okay. Where do I begin? So I got pregnant on my birthday in 2018. My birthday is August 5th. My son was due May 5th, 2019, but I was induced May 1st, 2019. When I had a fairly healthy pregnancy throughout the beginning of my pregnancy. I was sick. I mean, that's normal it could be normal for any pregnancy, dealing with morning sickness and tiredness and stuff like that. And when I was 20 weeks, I found out that my son had a heart defect. At our anatomy scan, maybe 4 weeks prior to that, the nurse said that she needed more pictures of his heart. And I kind of felt like maybe something was wrong then, but I didn't know. So I just was like, Lord, please don't let there be anything wrong with my baby. And when we went to the next scan, they told us that he had a heart defect, but they were unsure of what actually it was. So they told me that I then had to come in once a week for scans to make sure that things were going, moving along smoothly, and he was healthy and breathing and gaining weight and stuff like that. And that his heartbeat was regular, even though it was never irregular during any of the scans. They just wanted to monitor how his heart was developing and if it would develop properly over time. And he was kind of on the small side until I was probably about 8 months. And then he had a growth spurt and was no longer underweight. And when he was born, the doctors realized that he had tetralogy of Fallot, which is a very rare congenital heart defect. And it's 4 heart defects in one. And the way that his heart was shaped, he was a very unique case. So they told us that he would have to grow and they wouldn't be able to operate then and there. Because while I was pregnant, they told me that they would probably have to operate on his heart as soon as he was born, and maybe 2 other times within first year of living. So, of course, I was petrified, stressed out, not knowing what to think, how to feel, just wanting my baby to be healthy. I was induced May 1st at midnight. And I ended up having to have an emergency C-section because I had preeclampsia. And every time I was having a contraction, his heart rate was dropping. And so it wasn't safe for him to stay inside of me to try to do a normal vaginal delivery. After he was born, I wasn't able to hold him or anything like that because they had to put all these tubes in him. He was born a blue baby. And so his skin was his hands and feet were blue because of the lack of oxygen that he was getting. because of the flow, like through his heart. It was like not devastating, but it hurt not being able to like hold your child after you give birth, like, and not being him, like being in this incubator for a period of time. And honestly, I wasn't able to even hold him for the first 7 days of his life because they had all kind of tubes in him. Finally, they were able to extubate him because he had a tube down his throat to help him with breathing. And he was able to learn how to breathe on his own. And they were running tests literally all day, every day, and like just trying to figure out what measures to go about helping him and figuring out what operations or what they could do to like bring his weight up and like help him grow more, because he was staying at like around 7 pounds, 3 ounces, 7 pounds, 4 ounces for weeks. He wasn't really growing. And when he was 28 days old, he passed away. It was the worst day of my entire life. I don't think anyone ever imagines that they would lose their child at any point. And so to not be ever able to take him home or leave the hospital with him, it was hard. And like the journey of grief and motherhood, you just never expect that you are the 1 in 4. I'm sorry.
No need to apologize. Take your time. That's what we're here for. We all have been here and we all understand the pain and we can hear it, and I'm going to honor it. So take your time.
Yeah. You just never expect it to be you. And for someone who has always wanted to be a mother, it was extremely devastating. And this being my first child, the excitement that came along with it, it was like my world was crushed. And the grief process has not been easy. I feel like it's a lifelong journey. And there'll be days that you'll be okay, and there'll be days that you won't be okay. You just have to fight every day.
I love that it is truly a journey, and you have to fight to put one foot in front of the other every day and look yourself in the face and say, hey, I'm going to make it through today, you know? So I would love for you to share about your journey in the NICU. You know, what were the doctors telling you? Were they able to give him an actual full diagnosis? And did he undergo any other surgeries? Were you able to hold him more often up until he passed away? What was that like?
Well, okay, so after he left, so he was in PCICU, which is for like pediatric cardiac intensive care unit. After he left there, after like the 7 days, he was still in like the pediatric care unit, but we were in our own room. So the doctors, I was really disappointed in how they handled the situation. Like, I feel like their bedside manners were great, but there was a lot of times when they couldn't tell me anything. And it got to the point where I started seeking out, like I had already sought out like a second opinion while I was pregnant, but I started seeking out other like institutions and other hospitals and doctors because I felt like, not that they were failing me, but they never had a real answer. So he never actually had an operation. After he was born, they said that the vessels to his heart that they would have had to operate on were too small. They were like about 1 millimeter. And if they had cut them, they would have probably dissolved. So he never actually had an operation. The doctors did diagnose him with tetralogy of Fallot, but they just kept saying, we're going to monitor him. The only thing that they did, they gave him a G-tube so that they could feed him better because of his breathing. He wasn't able to like properly suck a bottle, and like the milk was going down like in the tube. It was getting into his lungs, which could cause infection. So he was fed through a feeding tube. So I breastfed and I pumped, and they would feed him through a tube, and we would practice like very small amounts of milk with him drinking out of a bottle, but he could never like fully drink out of a bottle because of the way that his airflow was going from his heart into his lungs. It wasn't safe. But they honestly just kept telling me, like, we're just going to keep monitoring him. We're going to keep monitoring him. But they never really was telling, like, I'd be like, so, like, what's going on? Like, is he growing? Like, what can you do? And it was never a straightforward answer. And after he passed away, I like flipped, and I emailed people. I was like, I'm coming to the hospital. Like, somebody's going to give me an answer for something, because literally 3 days before he passed away, the doctors were like, well, we're going to send you guys home. Because he was on oxygen as well, because he could breathe on his own, but it just wasn't like 100%. So we ordered oxygen. They were like, we're going to send you guys home and see how his growth is. And, you know, he had the G-tube operation and him gaining weight. And 3 days later, he passed away. And so I was a little furious, because I was like, why would you send us home and he's not stable enough to go home? Like, or why would you guys suggest that we go home, and then 3 days later, my son passes away? It's obvious that he wasn't stable enough to go home. So, like, were you just trying to get rid of us? Like, I was upset. No one to this day could ever give me an answer. All they could say is, well, we didn't know this was going to happen. And we weren't able to operate on him right then and there because his vessels were too small.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. Especially since you were getting your hopes up that they were going to send you home, and they didn't never mention, like, we were going to send you home on hospice care, or, you know, having someone come. And then, you know, he ends up passing away, you know, because obviously because of the defect of his heart. So I would love for you to talk about what you did next. You know, after he passed away, were you all able to have a memorial service or a funeral for him? And really, what was those next, you know, few weeks like? Since you were still lactating, I'm assuming that you were still have milk coming out. You know, were you able to dry your milk up? All of that.
Yeah, I was still lactating, and it was a harsh reminder that my body knew that I had given birth to a baby, but I didn't have a baby in my arms. We did have a funeral for him. It was a beautiful service. Like I said, I'm originally from Chicago, so my family and friends came down, because I was living in South Carolina at the time, and my son's father is from South Carolina. So we had a service for him there. And after, you know, the smoke cleared, I isolated. I did not go home to be with my family. I stayed with my son's father at the time, and I didn't want to talk to anybody. My anxiety was extremely high, because, you know, when people know you have a baby, people ask about the baby, or when something like that happens, like, I feel like people are more comfortable with adult death than they are a child's death. And so they become very awkward. And I just wanted to avoid people at all costs. So I isolated. I barely left the house. And when I did, I went around people that I knew would just let me be, because that's what I needed at that time. Like, I was extremely depressed, and my anxiety was like on 100,000. Like, I didn't even want to go to the grocery store, because I didn't want people to ask me what happened, because I could barely talk about it then. Like, if I opened my mouth to talk about it, I would break down. And so I just didn't want to see anyone. And I had never experienced anxiety like that before, or even depression, like just feeling like you're living in this dark cloud and like your body's still going through postpartum. It was like my breasts were still lactating. I actually donated milk, but it got to a point after a couple of weeks where I just couldn't do it anymore, because in my mind, it was like, this milk is supposed to be for my baby, and I don't have a baby here with me. And like, I won't say my mind was playing tricks on me, but the depression had set in. And it was like, on one hand, I want to help other babies, but this was for my baby. And so I after a while, I did just, I dried my milk up on my own, because my doctor was basically like, oh, there's nothing we can give you. Like, you just have to like, just wean yourself off of it. And I actually looked up ways on like Google ways and YouTube and other things and ways to like dry up my own milk. But it was difficult. It was dark for a while. And then I was angry with God for a long time. And even though I never really lost my faith, I just was like, why? Like, why me? And my play mom was basically like, we always ask God, why us? But we never ask God, why not us? Like, you don't know what God's reason is for doing this to you, but you need to ask him. Like, you need to seek out the answers and you need to really like dig deep. And so, I mean, I'm still not 100% clear on why me, but I leaned in. Like, I knew that even if God never revealed to me why he chose me to go through that he could be the one that comforted me. So I knew that I needed to lean in and I really needed to dig myself out of the hole that I was in. And so I started reading books about like child and infant loss and just like mindset maintenance and like getting myself back on track. And I also went to therapy, but my therapy experience was terrible in the beginning. I saw maybe 3 therapists, and the very first therapist that I saw, she was just like, okay, I'm gonna put you off to somebody else. It was like what I was telling her, like she didn't want to deal with it. And then next I felt like I was a burden to her, like as if I felt like I was comforting her in every session. Like when I would say something and we would talk about stuff, she was always on the brink of tears. And I felt like I always had to be like, it's okay. Like, but I never felt like a weight was lifted off of me or lighter when I left out of the session. So I had to stop going to her too. And then I found someone that I could talk to, but it just didn't last very long. But I do suggest going to therapy. It was just my experience wasn't great in the beginning.
Understood. And you definitely want to keep going back. I would love for you to talk about, any books or other resources that you use that have helped you in this last year to grieve.
I read a bunch of books, actually. Amazon has a lot of books about like child loss. Some of them were, I can't think of some, I'll Hold You in Heaven, Surviving the Loss of a Child, Almost a Mother, Grieving the Child I Never Knew, and like other like mental mindset books, like Mental Wholeness, and other like motivational books to just like get your mind off of what was going on. And also like the Instagram community. Like I never imagined that I would be using social media as a tool to like help me grieve, but there were pages like your page Sisters in Loss and the Morning Moms and other like I follow like other like hashtags like child loss and infant loss awareness, and like the Children's Heart Foundation. Like I did a heart walk, and it was good to be in the presence of other people who have experienced what you've experienced. And even though like I'm not as active on social media as other people are, just being able to read other people's story and feel like you're not alone, it helped. It was like somebody gets it, because most people don't experience child loss or even like miscarriages and stuff like that. So it felt like I was included in something, even though I wasn't necessarily vocal.
Absolutely. So I would love for you to share just some encouraging words with our listeners. We are right now living in a time of uncertainty with COVID-19 and this pandemic. And we really just are not sure about what life is going to be like in this new normal. So what encouraging words can you leave with our listeners as they go through their own grieving and healing process during this time of uncertainty?
God is not through with you yet. And you really have to dig deep and figure out who you are and what what silver lining you can bring to life, even through the midst of the storm. I know for me, I hop back into work. Like I'm a worker. And so it helped me, but I also had to do like a lot of self-care, and I still do self-care. I find things that make me happy and I do them alone, because an idle mind is a devil's playground. And if you just sit and think about the struggles that you're going through, your mind is going to keep you there, and you don't want to stay there. So just remember that God is not through with you yet. And there's a reason why you're still here, even if your baby isn't.
Absolutely. I love that. I would love for you to drop your socials. I know you said you're not up there, but I know people are going to want to connect with you, especially since, you are experienced in such a rare, heart condition with your son. So drop your social with us.
My Instagram is at Royal Kei, ROYALKEI. And you can connect with me on Facebook, Keivon Hardy, KEIVON HARDY. And I know you guys heard me mention like how I'm a worker and how like getting back to work really helped me. I also just wrote a book. So for any of you that are entrepreneurs or looking to become entrepreneurs, I wrote a 12-step guide on how to start your own business or nonprofit organization. The Instagram tag is at entrepreneur, ENTREPRENEWER_guide. And that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Keivon, for sharing your story and your light with us. It has been a blessing, and I'm happy and honored that you shared your story with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm actually glad that I did it, because I've never really talked to anyone besides like my inner circle about, how it feels to like lose a child. And I'm really grateful for like the advocacy that you do when it comes to like Black maternal health and, informing people and giving people knowledge about like child and infant loss. I appreciate you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For show notes, go to sistersinloss.com. To stay connected with us and join the Sisters in Loss community and receive my weekly newsletter, please go to sistersinloss.com/newsletter. That is sistersinloss.com/newsletter. Please rate and review this episode, and I will talk to you next week.